Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today for Houzz and CIAT's How to Stand Out from the Crowd and Differentiate Yourself online webinar. My name's Melissa. I'm a part of the industry marketing team here at Houzz UK. I am excited to be joined by Niall Healy, founder of Healy Cornelius Design Consultancy Limited and PR and Communications Officer for CIAT's Greater London Regional Committee. So we will be running you through today's session. Some of you may also know my colleague Kaya. She's online with us this morning. She's going to be able to answer any technical questions you have. You should have a GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll be able to see there should be a tab toward the bottom that says questions. If everyone wants to kind of test that out for me right now, click on that and you'll see that you can ask questions to the organizer. If everyone wants to type in where they are logging in from so we can make sure that's working. Okay, so we have some people from Bristol. We have a couple from Northern Ireland, Warwick, Dublin. Okay, so we're kind of spread out all over the UK and Ireland. That's great. Okay, so it seems that that is working for everyone. Great. We're going to actually use this box later on during our Q&A with Niall. Just to let you know, we are also recording today's session, so don't worry about taking any notes. If you do happen to miss something, the recording will be sent across to you next week. Okay, so before we jump into our Q&A with Niall, here's just a quick agenda for the webinar. Houzz will share some of our latest data. We're going to explain why it's really important for you to be online. Then we're going to talk about actually going into some specific tips for creating a really strong online brand. So something that we call a standout story. After that, we'll discuss the best way to actually use online forums like discussions and comments so you can reach new clients. And finally, we'll have our chat with Niall and hear firsthand from one of our industry experts. Okay, so before we jump into it, for anyone who doesn't know what Houzz is, I saw some people already have Houzz profiles, but some of you are actually brand new. So for anyone who doesn't know, Houzz is the largest high-end residential database in the entire world. So we're a vibrant community. We're powered by lots of social tools. Houzz is the easiest way for someone to get really anything they need to turn a project into a reality. So they can get design advice, project advice, inspiration, product information, and actually hire a professional. Houzz has really organic roots as well. So it was actually started by a husband and wife. They were living in New York and moving to Palo Alto. They bought this amazing 1950s ranch style home. It needed an entire gut. They had no idea where to start. They thought it would be a really fun project. Soon they learned it was not fun at all. They started with sort of what's your design style? What's my design style? They realized that there was really no place they could go for all the information. They bought dozens of magazines, were ripping out pages, but the images they liked had actually no information. So they thought, well, how do we find out about these products in this picture? How can we find the designer who actually designed this? And from there, Houzz was born to solve this problem for both homeowners and professionals. We now have over 40 million users on Houzz every month globally and 1.5 million professionals who actually use our site for business. Specifically in the UK, we've got 2 million homeowners and we have 60,000 professionals who are using our platform for business. Professionals particularly like our site because of the user they are able to reach. So most users in the UK are homeowners. Actually, a quarter of them own two homes. Our average age is actually 50. So this is something people really like because it's not a first-time buyer. This person typically has a bit more money to spend. And that's actually shown through the fact that 36% of our users have a home valued over £500,000. For many professionals who use our platform, they've historically gotten clients through word of mouth, through recommendation. So initially, it's often hard for them to accept that digital branding is something important for them to use as a supplement for their business. But have a think about this. In a recent study, Houzz revealed that the average person actually checks their phone, ready for it, 85 times per day. Yeah, the average person checks their phone 85 times per day and actually uses that device for over 5 hours every day. Ask most of your clients, 87% will tell you that their phone doesn't leave their side day or night. And 40% of people actually research their last purchase on a smartphone. So not only do you have to be online, but you also have to be mobile friendly. Okay, so how does this relate to Houzz? So the average user on Houzz spends about 5 months on our site before actually making any sort of decision about what they want, who they want to hire. And actually, the larger the project, the more time they spend. So for example, a custom home might take actually 16 months of planning before they make any decisions. Homeowners will come online and do a number of things. They look for inspiration. They want to look at products, figure out what kind of style they like. They want to research. They are looking for professionals before they're making a hiring decision. So the best way to actually get clients online is to be seen during this time. So the planning process shapes what they want and who they want to hire. If they keep on seeing you and your photos and you're resonating with them online, they're actually much more likely to hire you. I call these people nice stalkers. They end up looking at your profile, at your website, actually months and months before they reach out to you. So by the time they do get into contact, they know so much about your business that the decision has already been made very, very clear for them. And in our latest survey, we actually learned that your personality, your experience, your ability to communicate are much more important than cost. Cost is actually the least important thing. So most of the time, if you can be really successful at cultivating nice stalkers like these, they're ready to hire you actually long before you hand over any sort of proposal or any sort of quote. Okay, so this brings us to the how. How can you cultivate nice stalkers? How can you create a really good story for a homeowner? Telling a story makes your brand stand out in the crowd. It's not enough to just put out the facts. Choosing a professional for a homeowner is an emotional process. They're choosing something for their home that they are going to live with, and you actually need to appeal to those emotional needs. Telling a story is the best way to do that. Here is a really good example of someone with absolutely no story. So I see a lot of profiles like these online, not just on Houzz, on Facebook, on any social media platform. We've made this profile anonymous, but I can't tell you it happens all the time that I come across stuff like this. This profile has been hastily thrown together without any real care or thought. Everything is factually correct, but they're not appealing to any sort of emotional needs for the homeowner or telling any sort of story. So, what are some ways that you can tell your story? Well, the first thing is in your business description. Highlight what really makes you unique. Your website or your Houzz profile, this is the first thing that a potential client will see. So use these platforms to highlight what you specialize in and also just showcase your unique set of skills. So not just I am an architectural technologist, but I have 25 years of experience, or we are a family run business. Do you have a high attention to detail or a reputation for thinking outside of the box? Really use your business description to point out what makes you different from anyone else out there. We sometimes forget that while you do these projects all the time, they are brand new for your clients. So make a point of highlighting how you actually will consider your clients' needs and work with your clients. The next step to creating your personal story online is to make sure that you're standing out with your reviews. Reviews will show that you can be trusted, and they also show that you've done this before. Reviews can come from both clients and colleagues. So some people have a hard time getting client reviews. We'll start with the colleagues and the people who you've actually worked with. Another tip to help you tell your story is to show your face. We find that people get a higher click through rate when they have a picture of themselves. So get a snap from your best angle, and we know that this will drive traffic. And even if it's a team effort, that's absolutely okay. We've got a lot of family run businesses. Just grab a friendly snap of the entire team. Okay, so those tips will help you tell your story. Now, what are the best ways to actually engage online? We speak with a lot of people who say, I know I should be commenting or liking things, but I don't know where to start. So here's how you should actually engage positively in these types of forums. The first is to actually respond to the good reviews you get. So after a review is posted on your Houzz profile, be sure to thank whoever posted it. Responding to a review from a happy client, it helps you maintain that relationship for repeat business because they appreciate your acknowledgement. But it also actually demonstrates to people who are looking at your profile that you've got a great relationship with the people you've worked with. You've built a really good rapport with that person and you do engage on a project. It also can showcase your personality, your expertise, and it does show that you have an attention to detail. So potential clients read your reviews and they read the responses as well. The pro community tell us that this is a small gesture that can really go a long way. Equally as important is to respond to bad reviews. I know this is the last thing you want to do. You might be tempted to ignore a subpar or a bad review, but you should actually do the opposite. Tell your side of the story. We've all been in awkward situations where maybe it didn't go exactly to plan. So this can happen. But by responding to a negative review with a calm answer and trying to actually fix that problem, you'll attract a level headed client. Uh, I love this example. So Kristen got a bad review. She responded it and said, I want to fix this. It was important to her that she didn't have a bad review on her profile. She fixed the problem. The reviewer went back and actually changed that review to 5 stars. This entire process was being watched by a third party who ended up hiring Kristen just because of the way she handled this interaction. So, as Kristen says, there is life after a bad review. Another effective form of online communication is to actually share some of your expertise. So you'll see articles online, especially on Houzz. We've got tons of editorials. Um, it's not enough to just say, oh, I agree or I disagree. Take the time to actually think outside of the box and show your knowledge. Now, some people are hesitant to do this because they don't want to give away their expertise for free, but you don't have to. For example, you could comment on a story and say, wow, I had a very similar project last year. This is how we solved the same issue. It shows, again, you're experienced, you know what you're doing, and you've been here before, and you're not giving away any advice that that person could potentially be paying for. Okay, so I've only just scratched the surface of what you are able to do to tell your story online, to engage. We've got tons more of information. If you want, you can always visit info.houzz.com/resources. We have tons of tips for professionals, um, more information, and I'll be able to answer questions about anything we spoke about. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Niall. So Niall graduated from Cork Institute of Technology in the Republic of Ireland, having studied architectural technology. He then moved to London to begin his career in the architectural profession in 1986, where he began working on a variety of commercial, interior, and high-end residential new builds, as well as refurbishments. Since then, he's completed an honors degree in architecture. He's contributed to academic research using artificial intelligence algorithms in the field of generative modeling, and he's co authored a research paper. Niall is the founder of Healy Cornelius Design Consultancy Limited, a practice that was the recipient of the Camden Building Control Quality Award in 2007. Currently, Healy Cornelius Design Consultancy has offices in London as well as the Republic of Ireland, offering full architectural services to clients, in addition to technical studio services to architects, interior designers, DMB contractors. Lovely to have you, Niall.
It's a pleasure to be here, Melissa.
Okay, great. So, my first question would be, how do you communicate to a client who isn't familiar with architectural technology?
Really, it's we communicate by explaining what the profession does, and essentially, architectural technology deals with all aspects of building design, from the specification of the external fabric of the building through to coordinating the structure and the infrastructure of services that go within the building. But it actually goes a little bit beyond that. The key aspect is to ensure that the design vision for that building is translated in a technical form that meets the design standards and complies with various bits of legislation, and is also communicated effectively to the construction team.
Okay, so one thing that I get asked a lot, are architects and architectural technologists fundamentally just doing the same exact job? If so, why or why not?
That's a very interesting question and one I get asked all the time as well. And the answer is one that we have to stretch back a long time to find, I think, an effective way of communicating the differences and similarities. And that's gone back 2,000 years to a chap called Vitruvius in Rome, who wrote the 10 books of architecture. And he defined architecture as containing three components, which is firmness, commodity, and delight. Now, the architectural technologist really works in the world of firmness and commodity. Firmness is the fabric and the structure of the building, that it's fit for its environment and it's fit for its use. Commodity is more about the layout and how it provides the facilities to those who use the building. And the world of the architect really looks at commodity and delight. Now, uh, there is an overlap in looking at layout and function, but essentially architecture has to have delight. I think it has to bring you some joy in your life, and that's what makes a piece of architecture. So this is where the two professions overlap. Now, having said that, I know many architects who are superb technologists, and I know many technologists who are excellent building designers, but we begin from a different foundation of education. One is a technical base and the other is more of a philosophical and design base.
Okay, interesting. So, how does your role differentiate from an interior designer then?
Essentially, when we work with interior designers, it's primarily on interior refurbishment projects, and the interior designers' responsibility is to deal with everything that defines the atmosphere and the quality of that space, the selection of finishes, textures, fabrics. There is an overlap when it comes to layout, and our role when we work with interior designers, again, is to translate that vision into a technical set of documents that meets with legislation and gets the various permissions, essentially things like landlord's permission and party wall agreements in place, so that the project can proceed without being hindered, and communicating that vision very clearly to the contractors.
Okay, so then do you actually see overlap between the architectural technologist's responsibility and the interior designer's responsibility?
I think there is an overlap when it comes to layout, because essentially we're both very interested in how the space functions. The interior designer, working really directly with the client, will understand the needs of the user. Sometimes those needs can conflict with bits of legislation, so you need to find technical solutions to deal with them. An example would be fire escape, where you want a large open space, so you may need to introduce a fire curtain to separate that space and provide a safe means of exit. So these are things that wouldn't necessarily be apparent to the client or the interior designer, but they're the aspects that we would bring to that conversation. And that's where there is a clear overlap, because this is where we need to coordinate the different parameters that we're working within.
Okay, so there are a lot of actual people working on the same project. In that case, who's the person that should be leading a project?
If it's an interior refurbishment project, I think in terms of the design lead, um, that would be the interior designer. They are dealing with the client directly. They're looking at the client requirements and they're making decisions on the kind of aesthetic and atmosphere of the space. There is an element of legislation called CDM regulations, where I think the architectural technologist would have a role as the principal designer, which is coordinating the design lead information and coordinating the other input from other consultants to ensure that there's a cohesive response to meet health and safety standards. So from that point of view, the interior architectural technologist would be quite appropriate for them to lead the technical design team, report to the interior designer as the design lead, and also perhaps deal with the administration of the contract, dealing directly with the builder and the valuations to ensure that the contract is administered effectively, and any changes and consequences of those changes are reported back to the interior designer and the client, so they can make a value judgment as to implementing any changes as the project progresses. So in a sense, you would let the design lead so that the vision is not lost in the process, but leading the technical team is where the technologist is quite useful, because they can speak that language of the other specialties that are involved.
have you been in a particular situation before where you were faced with multiple professionals maybe stepping on each other's toes or overlapping? And how was this particular situation resolved?
Um, I think each profession looks at the challenge of delivering a project from its own perspective. So there can be conflicts of objective in that sense. But what's very important at the outset of the project is to define the roles and to define the scope of each of the parties involved and decide who has the final decision on certain aspects. So from that point of view, I'll go back to interior design projects again. If a decision, a technical decision, is going to affect the appearance or layout of the building, then the interior designer has to have the final say on how to implement that. And once you've got that structure established and everybody understands their role and the chain of command, then the likelihood of conflict is then massively reduced. And if there are issues, they're easily resolved.
Okay, great. So we've talked a lot about winning new clients. What, in your eyes, is actually the key to successfully winning new commissions?
Um, Certainly, social media and platforms such as Houzz are essential to have a presence. You mentioned about telling the story. I think you have to be very authentic to your story and how you tell that story, because if it's not a generic blurb that you're putting on your website, if it's something that's specific to the personality of your company and the skill set of your company, clients can see that. They read between the lines and they'll understand it. So we use Facebook and Twitter. We also use our website and our platform and Houzz to tell those stories. And we notice that when we get an inquiry, there is a jump in the hit rate on the website. There is a jump in the visits to the various other platforms. So we're able to get feedback from these platforms and see where they're effective. We also monitor the effectiveness of various bits of communication that we put on those platforms. So posting an album of photographs, and suddenly somebody will like 2 or 3 images and they share them. So the reach of that increases, and then that spreads the story as well, because if somebody sees an image they like, they'll trace that back, they'll find you as the source, and that's really essential. It validates your presence in the industry, I think.
And so actually before we started this webinar, Niall and I were chatting, and you did say though that you historically have gotten most of your clients through word of mouth, through recommendations as well. So what made you decide that you had to be online when this is the way you previously got your clients?
I think I think recommendations are the most powerful way to win work, because if somebody recommends you, it means they have a trust in your ability, and it's the trust element that's key. But having said that, when you get a recommendation, you mentioned about how many times people check their mobile phones. We will get people as friendly stalkers, if I can steal your phrase, checking us out on our social media platforms before they will make that call, even after the recommendation. If that was absent, I think the trust element of the recommendation would be slightly damaged, because you just don't seem to be present. So it's really important that your story is there and is accessible, and the recommendation element is really key, is key to that. And always communicating with your clients and being in a position where they're happy to recommend, if not a review online, but just as a recommendation on a face-to-face, is really important in terms of maintaining your business as a successful business.
Okay, so one last question from me, which is one we get all the time. A lot of professionals tell us that they have major issues getting clients to review them online. So, do you have any particular tips for people who are trying to reach out to clients?
The first one is this most simple tip ever, and that is ask. If you don't ask, you won't get a review. When you do ask, it's especially using Houzz as a fantastic tool for communicating with clients and inviting reviews. It's always useful to follow up just with a courtesy call and saying, "Oh, I've sent you an invite. It would be great if you could give us a review." I wouldn't push it any more than that with clients. If people are willing to write a review and they do it after that initial contact, they will write a very eloquent review. If you push people that they feel obliged to, then the review isn't going to have that spirit, I think. So you need to be careful, because not even happy clients won't necessarily want to write a review online. So it's very much a personal choice for them, but you do have to not be afraid to ask and put yourself out there. And as I mentioned, the Houzz tool is a very easy way of actually accumulating those reviews.
Okay, great. So those are all the questions from me, but what I'd like to do now is actually open it up. If you want to go ahead and actually use that questions box, we, both Niall and myself, will be able to answer any questions that you have, either about Houzz, about CIAT, or any of the things we've spoken about today. So feel free to go ahead and actually use the question box to type in your questions and send them to us so Niall can answer now. Okay, so it looks like we actually had have our first question, which is, okay, so this actually would relate to everyone. How do you use, so the question is, how can you actually use online platforms to show your CIAT membership? How would you recommend that someone does that?
I think for our members who are practicing and they're members of CIAT, then to use the brand and the logo on their website, and to use it on the Houzz website, because there's a tool where you can add that to the Houzz website, adds a kind of authenticity to your level of qualification and your level of expertise and professional knowledge. Also making sure that your details are on the practice register on the CIAT website, because that is also a place that clients go and look for new work, or look for professionals, and creating that link and ensuring that you promote yourself as a chartered member, if you're a chartered member or a chartered practice, because that gives clients more confidence, because they understand that you are a professional who's complying with a code of conduct and part of an institute, and you will be valued by your peers.
Okay, so we had another question come in, which is, how do you communicate what CIAT is to the homeowner?
Um, well, the initial meeting with a homeowner is to explain to them what a chartered architectural technologist actually is, and what the profession is, and what I've been describing earlier in the questions that I was answering, so that they understand that this is an aspect of the profession that's key, and that we are members of an institute, and it's a specialist area of practice within the construction industry that ties all these elements of design together. So that's the initial conversation we would have with a client, just so they understand who we are and what we do.
Okay, great. So we have gotten a couple questions, but they're not specific to everyone listening. So if we don't answer your particular question, don't worry. We will follow up with an email afterwards or a phone call. We do have one. Do you ever have problems actually communicating the cost of design to a client, and how do you get them to up their spend?
Um, Initially, you have to get a clear idea of what the scope of the project is going to be and what their expectations are in terms of quality of specification. And from that, you can build a general cost plan or a budget cost plan. And as a practice, we tend to do this at sketch design stage, because even though it's quite broad brush, we will give prices from X to Y. So this will cost between X and Y. So the client has some idea of where they're going with the design. Because say, for example, the client has 100,000 to spend and they describe a superb scheme, and you come back with the sketch design and say, this is going to cost you 250 to 300, then you need that conversation very early so that they can manage their ambition with their budget. Because you could go down the line of designing a superb scheme for 300,000, but they've only got 100,000 to spend. So cost is a design parameter. It is a very important design parameter to engage with very early in the process, to ensure that you're taking the project in the right direction.
Okay, so it does look like we have one more cost-related question off the back of that, which is, how much do you allow in a contingency fund?
We would begin, depending on the complexity of the project. If it's an interiors project, probably 10%. If it involves new build construction, maybe 15 or 20%, depending on the complexity. But we look at the contingency budget and we reduce that percentage as the project proceeds, because if you're halfway through the project, you have eliminated half of the risk. So that contingency budget then can be considered as part of the finishing and fitting out budget, so you can deploy it to improve the quality of the design if the client is willing to spend the money. So you look at it as something that isn't a fixed sum, but it diminishes as the project nears completion, because there's no point getting to the end of the project with £20,000 contingency fund you haven't spent, and the client is struggling to make a decision on tiles, and they'd rather spend an extra £1,000 on tiles for a bathroom when it's in the contingency fund. So understanding the dynamics of that's quite important.
Okay, so we did just get a question actually specifically about social media. So let's switch hats again. What percentage of time do you designate to social media platforms on a weekly timetable? And who is it that you actually allocate those responsibilities to?
Within our practice, it's actually shared between a few of us in terms of posting on social media, but it's difficult to judge because you could do it so quickly and so easily. 10 minutes on a train writing a post, or 5 minutes while you're having a cup of coffee. If you add it all up, maybe 2 hours a week would be the total that we would invest, but that 2 hours isn't 2 hours of what I would call productive time. It's 2 hours of that in-between time that you spend on a train or having a coffee or just seeing something on your own Facebook page that you decide to share on your company page, which you think is of value or of interest.
Okay, so we just got one last question. I just want to be cognizant of time, so this may be the actual last question that we ask Niall. Again, if we haven't gotten to your questions, because it looks like we haven't gotten to a few, we will follow up after the webinar. This person said, so similar subject about explaining the costs for architectural fees. How many alterations would be normal?
I think probably by that question they mean is how many revisions would be normal in the scheme. It really is down to the individual practice how they structure their offer. We tend to offer a fixed fee broken down into individual stages, and if it becomes unreasonable in terms of the amount of time you're spending at a particular stage, then you'd need to sit and discuss with the client that you need to renegotiate this because it's taking much longer. So nothing is perfect first time, so you would expect at a design stage to do 2, 3, maybe 4 revisions, but those revisions would actually decrease in scale as you progress along that journey. Because if you take a brief and it's a well-structured brief with the client and you present a proposal, then yes, you might change 10 or 15% of that proposal, but then as you progress, because you're signing off at each of those meetings to change the design, you should be getting to smaller and smaller revisions. If a client keeps changing their mind and it goes from one scheme to another scheme to a different scheme, then you need to try and understand their motivation as to why they're indecisive in that way, and reassess the contract of services that you have with them. So that might just require a conversation to talk about expectations on both sides. But it's very difficult to legislate on any one specific point. It really is down to how you develop your offer and your relationship with your client.
Okay, so it's been great to speak with you, Niall. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to everyone today.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Cool. So, if anyone, again, if your question wasn't answered, we will go ahead and follow up with you because we did have a few. I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. There will be a short survey that pops up right when you exit. If you could please just take a couple minutes to fill it out, because it does help us form webinars for the future that hopefully you will attend as well. Thank you so much for coming today, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.